Okay, so we are today on day 12, Baruch Hashem, of Sichos HaRan daily, and we find ourselves in the middle of Sicha Zion. But before we begin, me especially today, because I just ran in late off of a call that ran long. I'm just going to take a breath, pause for a minute, transition into the learning. We have today a story that Rabbi Nachman brings from his grandfather, Rabbi Nachman Mehardakana. B'shamati ma'aseh mizikni Rabbi Nachman. I heard a story from my grandfather, Rabbi Nachman, Zechrono Lebracha. Kishahaya alasina. He was on a boat. He was traveling by ship. Kam echad lo haya lahem lechem v'lo achlu kama yamim. And he didn't have any food, and he hadn't eaten for many days. Ad she'agiu le'ezer v'lo haya shum Yehudim rak Yishmael. And they arrived at a certain city. They docked at a certain city, and there were no Jews there. There were only Arabs. V'lakach Yishmael echad as Rabbi Nachman. And a certain Arab, probably not an Arab, it was probably a Turk, but a Muslim, I imagine. A certain Muslim individual took Rabbi Nachman in, v'nasam lo lechol, and he gave him food to eat. V'hu tvar lo achal kama yamim, and he hadn't eaten for many days already. He needed food. V'natal yadav, he washed his hands. V'birach birachas hamotzi, and apparently he gave him bread, so he made a hamotzi. V'kodem shehistu lechol, and before he began to eat, balo al machshavte, before he took a bite of this food, something popped into his head. And what popped into his head? The pasuk in Mishlei, al tlachem im lechem ra ayin. Pasuk in Mishlei says, "Don't eat bread of someone who is a ra ayin, someone who has an ayin ra, someone who is stingy, someone who is poverty minded, someone who has a poverty mindset." That's what popped into his head as he's about to eat this bread. Umachshavos shalanu einam davar klal, and our thoughts, the thoughts that pop into our head, these are not insignificant. These are not for nothing. Nothing is for nothing, and nothing happens by chance, and nothing happens for no reason. The Arizal writes at the very, very, very beginning of Shar Ruach HaKodesh, specifically that very high people, as an introduction to the concept of Nebuah and Ruach HaKodesh. What is Nebuah and what is Ruach HaKodesh? Nebuah and Ruach HaKodesh is the consciousness that a person has that everything that they do and everything that they say and everything that they encounter and experience and that's going on around them has incredible amounts of meaning and is intentionally creating through those actions here, down here in the lower world and those experiences. They're creating Oris Elyonim that correspond to them, that make whole corresponding realities in upper worlds and Atzilus, etc. And being aware of that, being conscious of that, opens a person up to receiving communication from those realities and learning things from those realities and being spoken to by those realities and being spoken to by the words one speaks and experiencing from the things that one experiences. And that's the essence of Nevuah, and that's the essence of Ruach HaKodesh in a very sort of simplified way. So our thoughts are not insignificant; they don't not matter. And so this thought that pops into Rav Nachman's head matters. So he says to himself, "Kacham Rabbi Nachman zikna b'sifra ma'asazu," and so b'sipur ma'asazu. And this is what my grandfather Rabbi Nachman said when he told over this story. He said, "Lo yadati ma lasos." I didn't know what to do. This thought popped in my head. The thought that popped in my head seemingly is, "Don't eat the bread." Right? Because the pasuk that popped into my head was, "Don't eat the bread of someone with an ayin rock." Right? And so the Gemara in Sota interprets this as someone who is mitzarei ayin, someone who's a miser, someone who's stingy. And we find in Sfarim that the idea here is that the things that exist within a person's orbit sort of take on an energy or a character of the person whose orbit, the person whose universe they exist within. So the miser's bread is miserly. It induces, it has a shemetz, it has an element of poverty to it. It could be the same piece of bread that's owned by a person with a miserly, a generous mindset, and a stingy mindset, and the bread that's owned by the person with the generous mindset, it carries within it generosity because it's being created specifically within the orbit of a generous person. So the oros and the without getting into complicated ideas, the oros that create that generous person's world are creating bread, this piece of bread that exists within that generous person's world. So it has an element of generosity to it. It has an element of abundance to it. And the bread of a stingy person, this piece of bread, it's not by accident that it exists within this person's world as opposed to the generous person's world. This piece of bread was Biratzon Hashem, intentionally created to exist within the stingy person's world. And so it has a character of stinginess to it. And therefore, absorbing that bread, internalizing that bread, you sort of internalize those oros and those elements. So Rabbi Nachman says, I didn't know what to do. On the one hand, I already said Birchas Hamotzi, and once you say a bracha, you have to eat. Came, but nevertheless, but despite the fact that I just made a bracha, nevertheless, I felt very uncomfortable, and it was in my thought, right, to go against the halacha and not eat this bread. This is what he says he's struggling with, right? He's probably struggling with this, right? Toch dibur, right? He doesn't make a new bracha. So he's probably struggling with this. These are thoughts passing through his head very, very rapidly, as thoughts do. Especially if we're attentive to them, they pass through very, very, very rapidly, and we can think things and we can reason through things very rapidly if we're paying attention. And then, as a result, then immediately afterwards, as I'm thinking this, as I had this, I'm about to eat the bread, I make a bracha, and then the pasuk of Al Tilachem im es lechem ra'ayin pops into my head, and I think, gosh, I shouldn't eat this bread. But on the other hand, I just made a bracha, so maybe I should eat this bread. But really, I shouldn't eat this bread, because if I eat this bread, it must be bad bread. Otherwise, this thought wouldn't have popped into my head. There's something negative about this bread that I shouldn't touch, that I shouldn't eat. And as this is going through his head, then another pasuk pops into my head. And the pasuk says that I commanded the ravens to sustain you, right? About Eliyahu. I commanded the ravens to sustain you. And so since that pasuk then popped into Rabbi Nachman's head, so then I ate. Then I ate the bread. And Rabbi Nachman, when he told over this story, he said, and it seems very, very right and very correct and very good to me that we rely on our thoughts. Because when something pops into our head, then at that moment, that's true. Again, we might not know exactly what the thought means. We might not exactly know what it's telling us, because just because it's saying something on the surface doesn't mean that that's actually what it's trying to tell us. But the thing that pops into my head, there's something true about this moment and about this time and this place and my position and my action in this moment that must be true about this particular thing, and that's why that thought popped into my head. It's all connected. He continues, and likewise, the same is true, and this is how we connect this to the beginning, where he talked about how important it is for a person to view themselves as a ben in a relationship with their Father in heaven. And if they don't feel that way, then they should work themselves up to feel that way. They should appreciate that they're not feeling that way and work themselves to feel that way, to think that way, to experience it that way. And the same is true for all of the other ideas and distracting thoughts that pop into our head to confuse us and distract us. After we receive a thought, and an experience, and now we're finding ourselves in a place of feeling distance and confusion, right? Because confusion is the opposite of clarity, and clarity is connection with the Or Ein Sof and the clarity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And confusion is a bechina of tzimtzum and koshech and suffix, all of which is a bechina of the absence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and distance from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But after we experience distance, then we'll experience the thought and it'll bring us back. The thought, then we'll experience closeness. Because only in Yaman, like what we explained above, sometimes a person will think to themselves, and it will come up in their thoughts that they are not roy, they're not fitting, they're not deserving of approaching God like a ben to a father, like a child to a father, and they're not really a child, and they've killed that relationship. Afal Pikeno, love lasos as shalo, as he said already yesterday, as we learned yesterday, as he said before. Your job in that situation is to just keep moving forward. Keep moving forward, and do what you need to do. What do you need to do? You need to try and approach God like a child. And then, in response to your moving forward, despite the sense of lack and the sense of distance, then you're going to receive shefa from above, and a new thought is going to pop into your head, and that thought will be a feeling of closeness, a feeling of that I can approach HaKadosh Baruch Hu like a child to a father. What's really going on here, what Rabbi Nachman is describing on a very experiential level and a phenomenological level, is really just a classic description or a rendition of the classic process of how things happen. Al-Pi Kabbalah, how things happen is that there's a sense of lack, there's a sense of need, there's a sense of pisaron, that produces what's called an aliyas man. It produces an upsurge upward, sort of reaching from down to above and saying, I need something that I don't have, and it's all up there, and I'm trying to get it. I don't feel like a ben, and because I don't feel like a ben, I need to feel like a ben. I want to feel like a ben, and either I could sit here in my chisaron, or I can respond to that sense of distance and that sense of deficiency by reaching for the thing that I want, which is a Kadosh Baruch Hu, by doing Yasa Es Shalo, doing what I need to do, regardless of how what I think the Kadosh Baruch Hu is telling me and giving me a sense of distance. The whole point of the sense of distance is to get me to reach and to get me to push and to do what I need to do, put my head down and keep working at it, keep being committed. And then what happens when you have a sense of chisaron, which produces a ratzon, which leads to an aliyas man, leads to a hishtokakus, a yearning and a need that directs itself upwards for whatever is present up there that I don't have down here. So in response to that need, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the ultimate giver, responds to that need and gives. And Yazar Hashem Yisbarach Yishlach Lo Machshavos Shel Hiskarvas. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will send you then the shefa that you're lacking, the thing that you're needing, the thing that you're reaching for, which is that feeling, that sense, that thought of closeness. Because the truth is, of course, that you are banim to Hashem Elokeichem. And it's not a chiddush, and it's not a miracle that God would send you a spark of experience of, oh yes, I am God's child, right? Or that God, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends you a flash of insight when you say, we said Musaf this week. We say Musaf when we say Musaf on Yom Tif, right? That a spark of realization that a hafta osanu v'ratzisa v'anu. Oh, that's really real. It's not a chiddush that you experience that. It's not a chiddush that you encounter that machshava, because it's a true machshava. The alkain roy lanu lifaresh Yechasenu b'tzareinu l'fanav yisparach ben hakubo with ne'aviv. And therefore, all we need to do is we need to press forward. We need to express upwards, right? That aliyas man, we need to express that yearning upwards. And then the thing that we think is lacking, which is really not lacking, but just in our experience and our sense of reality, it feels like it's lacking, that will be fixed. Because the sense and the thought and the feeling will shift, because our thoughts and our feelings are always shifting and are always changing. And if we feel down now, we're not going to feel down forever, because we once upon a time didn't feel down, and we know that that's true. So the down will go away, and when the down goes away, it'll come back again, because now we're feeling up, and up is not a permanent state, because we felt down in the past. So up is not permanent, and we'll feel down again, and it's an endless cycle of growth. Hopefully, if you respond to the downs by, as he says here, pushing forward and saying, I am going to do what I need to do, and I'm going to keep doing what I need to keep doing, and I'm not going to let the thought that pops into my head that I know is false, because it's not true. I am close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If I let that push me forward, then eventually things will come full circle. Okay. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Thank you again to Mark Cantora for sponsoring this week's learning. Refuah Shalema Yoni Ben Avram Avinu. Hopefully, our learning will be supposed for him and for all Shara Holy Yisrael. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll continue on Monday. Be'ez Hashem.